Hello friends, today's video is based on class 10th English supplementary reader Footprints Without Feet, chapter number 5, Footprints Without Feet. So let's begin. So friends, this chapter is written by H.G. Wells. So first let us know something about the author or the writer. H.G. Wells is a very famous writer and novelist, and this chapter is a part from his novel The Invisible Man. That means that this chapter number 5, Footprints Without Feet, is a part of his novel The Invisible Man. This is a story of a scientist who wants to discover the formula of invisibility. That means that how human can be invisible, and he was successful in doing so, and he makes a formula for being invisible. Does he use or misuse his discovery? So let's read the chapter and find out. So let's read the chapter. The chapter starts with two boys. The two boys stared in surprise at the fresh, muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. The two boys are staring at looking at the freshly imprinted footprints of a bare person at a doorstep of a house. So they think, what a barefooted man doing on the step of a house. They were thinking that what a barefooted man was doing at the steps of a house and in the middle of London. So this sentence tells us that this incident was going on in London. And where was the man? And the biggest question was, the footprints were there, but where was the man who imprinted those footprints? As they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. Now, when they were gazing at those footprints, a very remarkable sight met their eyes. They saw that from nowhere a new footprint, a fresh footprint came there at the doorstep of the house. They were shocked to see that from where the footprint came there. Further footprints followed, one after another, descending the steps and progressing down the street. That means that the footprints were following one after another and descending the steps of the doorstep and progressing down the street. That means the footprints were going towards the street. But there was no person visible to these two boys. Only the footprints were visible. The boys followed the footprints, fascinated, until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter, and at last disappeared altogether. That means that the two boys followed the footprints, and they were fascinated that from where these footprints were coming from. But slowly and slowly, those impressions became fainter and fainter. Due to that mud which was there, that was getting fainter and fainter, and those footprints then disappeared finally. The explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. The Billwide boys had been following a scientist who had just discovered how to make human body transparent. That means that the two boys were following the footprints of a scientist who had discovered the formula for how to make human body transparent or invisible. Here the author tells that these footprints are of Griffin, and Griffin is a brilliant scientist. He is a brilliant scientist who has discovered the formula of invisibility. Griffin was working on a formula to make human body invisible, and he was successful in doing so. He swallowed the liquid and became invisible, but not his clothes. His body became as transparent as glass, but still was solid. That means that after drinking the solution or the formula, his body became invisible, but he was still visible because he was wearing his clothes, and the clothes didn't become invisible, and he was became transparent but was still solid because the formula has only made him invisible, not that anyone can pass through him or he can pass through walls, etc. Griffin, the scientist, had carried out an experiment after experiment to prove that the human body could become invisible. Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as glass. That means he was still solid but invisible. Brilliant scientist thought he was. Griffin was rather a lawless person. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. Now, here the author tells the character of Griffin. He tells that Griffin is very brilliant scientist, but he is also a lawless person. That means that he does not mean by any law. He does not think that there are laws. He don't want to follow the laws. His landlord disliked him. That means the landlord was very angry with him and he wanted to get him out of the land. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. That means that by this action of the landlord, Griffin became so much angry that he set the landlord's house on fire. To get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. Thus, it was that he became a homeless wanderer, without clothes, without money, and quite invisible, until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. That means that now he wanted to escape from his landlord, and in order to do that, now he was invisible. So in order to escape, he had to remove his clothes so that the landlord could not see him. So now he was a homeless wanderer and was without clothes and without money, but he was invisible. And while walking by the streets, he suddenly or by accidentally stepped on some mud and left footprints as he walked. That means that when he walked by the streets, at somewhere he stepped on some mud and then he left the footprints behind him, and the boys chased those footprints only. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London, but his adventures were by no means over. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. It was a winter. The air was bitterly cold and he could not do without clothes. Instead of walking about the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. That means that he escaped easily from the two boys who got tired following the footprints, and then the footprints also disappeared. So they left chasing him. But that time when he was invisible was a bad time for Griffin, because now he was invisible and without clothes, and London had a very cold winters. The winters in London are very, very cold. So he has to face the cold winters without clothes. The air was bitterly cold and he could not do without clothes. That means the air was very cold, the temperature was very low, and he could not resist him from wearing clothes because he was feeling cold, very cold, because the environment, the temperature was very low in London. Instead of walking around the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. That means instead of roaming around the streets, he decided to rest in a big London store for warmth. That means to get some warmth, he slipped to a big London store. Closing time arrived, and as soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes. So, when the closing time of the store arrived, Griffin was already inside, but no one was able to see him because he was invisible. So when the shutters of the store were closed, Griffin was alone inside, and he took advantage of it, and he wore clothes to get himself warmth, and he also ate food present in the store. Soon, with shoes and an overcoat and a wide brimmed hat, he became a fully dressed and visible person. In the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. That means that in the kitchen of the restaurant or the big store, he found cold meat and coffee for drinking and eating, and he followed up the meals with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. That means he had taken some sweets and wine from the grocery store before. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quills. That means he slept on some quills. Quills mean blanket or anything which you wear in winters. So finally he settled down to sleep on a pile of quills. He slept on the piles of quills. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well. The Griffin thought that he would wake up early in the morning and remove his clothes and become invisible, and no one will be able to see him. But Griffin was sleeping yet, and the store was opened. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning. That means he was still sleeping when the assistants of the store arrived to the shop the next morning. When he saw a couple of them, when he saw a couple of them approaching, he panicked and began to run. They naturally gave chase. That means that when he saw that those people were chasing him, he thought of running, and he got panicked and began to run, and those assistants chased him. In the end, he was able to escape only by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. So once more he found himself invisible but naked in the chilly January air. That means the assistants were chasing him and chasing, not stopping. So Griffin had to remove his clothes in order to get invisible, so that the assistant could not find him. And he removed his clothes and became invisible in the chill January air. In the cold temperature, he had to be naked. This time he decided to try the stock of a theatrical company in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty face above his shoulders. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane, the center of the theatre world. That means now he decided to go to a theatre company, and he wanted to go to a theatre company because theatre company was only the place from where he could find him clothes also, and with clothes he could find something to hide his invisible face. That means he wanted some wigs or hats and some mask, etc. from the theatre company, and he went to the Drury Lane. the center of the theatre world. He soon found a suitable shop. He made his way, invisible, upstairs, and he came out a little later wearing bandages around his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, big bushy side whiskers, and a large hat to escape without being seen. He courageously attacked the shopkeeper from behind after when he robbed him of all money he could find. That means when he went to the theatre company, he found a suitable shop from where he could get something to hide himself or make him visible again. So he wore clothes, and to hide his face, he wore bandages around his forehead and dark glasses and false nose, big bushy side whiskers, and a large hat, in order that no one would be able to see his invisible face. To escape without being seen, he courageously attacked the shopkeeper from behind. That means then Griffin attacked the shopkeeper in order that the shopkeeper would not try to stop him, and he robbed him out of money. That means that he took all the money he could find from the shopkeeper. So let's move to the next page. Okay, there's something here also. Eager to get away from the crowded London, he took a train to the village of Ipin, where he booked 2 rooms at the local inn. That means that he was not very suitable in London, because anybody can chase him or find him in London. So he booked a train to a village of Ipin. That means he went to Ipin, and where he booked 2 rooms in a local inn. 2 rooms in the local inn. Inn means any restaurant, any hotel from where you can stay. The arrival of a stranger at an inn in winters was in any case an unusual event. A stranger of such uncommon appearance set all tongues wagging. This means that the arrival of the stranger, that means the time was cold winters, and the arrival of a person to stay in the inn was shocking, because everyone only stays at their homes in these winters. So this was very shocking. It was a very strange thing for a customer or a person to come at the inn in such an unusual time and in a very unusual getup. That means he was covered with all bandages and big hat. So this all was very much uneven for the innkeeper. Innkeeper means the manager of the inn. Her name was Mrs. Hall, the landlord's wife. So the arrival of a stranger at an inn in the winter was in any case an unusual event. A stranger of such uncommon appearance set all the tongues wagging. Mr. Hall, the landlord's wife, made every effort to be friendly, but Griffin had no desire to talk, and told her, "My reason for coming to Ipin is a desire for solitude. I do not wish to be disturbed in my work. Besides, an accident has affected my face." That means he straightly talked to Mr. Hall and said that I had came to Ipin because I want solitude. Solitude means a time in alone, that no one should disturb him, no one should come to his home. And he had got an accident which has affected his face, and that's why he is wearing bandages all around his face. Satisfied that her guest was an acrobatic scientist, and in view of the fact that he had paid in her advance, that means eccentric. Eccentric means uncommon, of uncommon behavior, a scientist of uncommon behavior, and in view of the fact that he had paid her in advance. That means that the Griffin, the scientist, had paid Mr. Hall the advance for living. That means that he used the money which he robbed from the theatre company's shop, and he gave advance from that money only. Mr. Hall was prepared to excuse his strange habits and irritable temper. That means Mr. Hall accepted that he was a stranger and didn't think of it because she was getting a advance. But the stolen money did not last long, and presently Griffin had to admit that he had no more ready cash. That means that the money which he robbed from the shopkeeper was now end up, and he was left with no money. So how should he pay the money to the manager, Mrs. Hall? He pretended, however, that he was expecting a check to arrive at any moment. That he made an excuse that he was expecting a check to arrive at any moment. That a check is coming for him and so that he could pay the bill of the inn. Shortly afterwards, a curious episode occurred. Very early in the morning, a clergyman and his wife were awakened by the noises in the study. Clergymen are the people who work in the church, and his wife were awakened by the noises in the study. That means they were woke up by the noises which were coming from their study. Creeping downstairs, they had the clink of money being taken from the clergyman's desk. Clergyman's desk. Study means that the table where the clergyman would have sit, and he listened to the noises that anyone is opening the drawer of the study and taking out the money which the clergyman has put there. Without making any noise and with a poker grasped firmly in his hand, the clergyman flung open the door. Surrender. Now, poker means a metallic rod. That means the clergyman took a metallic rod with him and he said, surrender, when he opened the gate. So let's move to the next page. Then to his amazement, he realized that the room appeared to be empty. That means when he opened the door, he saw that the room was empty. No one was there. He and his wife looked under the desk, behind the curtains, and even up the chimney. There wasn't a sign of anybody. Yet the desk had been opened and the housekeeping money was missing. That means the money was robbed by the scientist Griffin, and the clergyman and his wife were unable to see him because he was invisible. So, extraordinary affair, the clergyman kept saying for the rest of the day. That means he kept on saying that it was a very extraordinary thing that happened to him, that how his money got vanished, but there was no one in the study room. So he was shocked all the day and keep saying this only extraordinary affair, but it was not an extraordinary as the behavior of Mr. Hall's furniture a little later that morning. The landlord and his wife were up very early and were surprised to see that the scientist's door wide open. Usually it was shut and locked, and he was furious if anybody entered his room. That means the landlord and his wife, the manager of the inn, were surprised to see the scientist's door open. That the door was opened and which was usually shut and locked. And he was furious if anybody entered his room. And he became very angry if anyone entered his room. The opportunity seemed too good to be missed. They peeped around the room, around the door, saw nobody and decided to investigate. Then the landlord and his wife peeped from the door inside the room in which Griffin was staying, and saw nobody. There was nobody and decided to investigate. The bedclothes were cold, showing that the scientist must have been up for some time, and strangers still, the clothes and bandages that he always wore were lying around the room. That means the clothes and the bandages which the Griffin, the scientist, wore were now lying on about the room. That they were lying here and there in the room. All of a sudden, Mrs. Hall heard a sniff close to her ear. That means she heard a sniff near her ear. A moment later, the hat of a bed spot leapt up and dashed itself into her face. That means, and after the sniff near her ear, she saw that a hat was coming from the bed spot and dashed into her face. Then the bedroom chair, being alive, became alive. As she and her husband turned away in the terror, the extraordinary chair pushed them both out of the room and then appeared to slam and lock the door after them. That means as the husband and Mrs. Hall turned away in terror, the extraordinary chair pushed them both up out of the room and then appeared to slam and lock the door after them. That means the chair pushed them outside the room and slammed the door before. Mrs. Hall almost fell down the stairs in hysterics. That means hysterics. That means frenzy, or her head was whirling because he was pushed out of the room. She was convinced that the room was haunted by spirits and that the stranger had somehow caused these to enter into her furniture. That means now she was thinking, Mrs. Hall was thinking that the room was full of evil spirits and the stranger who was living in the inn had entered those spirits in the furniture and then the furniture attacked her. So, my poor mother used to sit in that chair, she moaned. Then Mrs. Hall said that the chair who hated her was the chair where her mother sat. That was the chair where her mother used to sit. To think it should rise up against me now. The feeling among the neighbors was that the trouble was caused by witchcraft. That means the neighbors were telling that there was something like witchcraft which had done this thing. But witchcraft or not, when news of burglary at the clergyman's house became known, that means when Griffin robbed the clergyman's house, that news became known to the whole village. The strange scientist was strongly suspected of having had a hand in it. That means everyone was in very much doubt and suspected Griffin that he was only the robber. Suspicion grew even stronger when he suddenly produced some ready cash, though he had admitted not long before that he had no money. That means the suspicion grew even more stronger when he gave he gave money instead of check to Mrs. Hall, before some time only he was having no money. That means they were relating the things that he only robbed the house and then given the bill. A village constable was secretly sent for. Instead of waiting for the constable, Mrs. Hall went to the scientist, who had somehow mysteriously appeared from his empty bedroom. She asked from Griffin, "I want to know what you have been doing with my chairs upstairs." That she asked what you are doing with my chair upstairs, and she demanded, And I want to know how it is you came out of an empty room and how you entered a locked room. She was asking that the room was empty, so how you came out of an empty room and how you entered a locked room. Because there was, when she went upstairs, there was no one in the room, and suddenly he came out of nowhere. So she was asking, demanding that from where he came from. So let's move to the next page. And now the scientist was always quick-tempered. That means now he became angry. Now he became furious. You don't understand you who or what I am, he shouted. Very well, I will show you. That means he said, you don't, he became furious and said, you don't understand who or what I am. Very well, I will show you. Suddenly he threw off bandages, whiskers, spectacles and even nose. It took him only a minute to do this. This horrified people in the bar found themselves staring at a headless man. That means when he removed the bandages, his artificial nose, his whiskers, his glasses, now his face was invisible. So the people present at the bar became very much furious and threatened that how a man could be headless. Mr. Jeffers, the constable, now arrived and was quite surprised to find that he had to arrest a man without a head. That means now the constable arrived and he was shocked to see a man without a head and came to know that he had to arrest a man without a head. But Jeffers was not easily prevented from doing his duty. If a magistrate's warrant ordered a person's arrest, then that person had to be arrested with or without his head. So the constable didn't think of a person without his head. He only wanted to do his duty and he moved to Griffin and to arrest him. There followed a remarkable scene as the policeman tried to get hold of a man who was becoming more and more invisible as he threw off one garment after another. Finally, shirt flew into the air and the constable found himself swirling with someone he could not see at. That means that now Griffin has removed his clothes and now he was invisible. So the constable was not able to find him, and without finding him he could not arrest him because now Griffin was invisible. So let's move to the next page. Some people tried to help him but found themselves hit by blows that seemed to come from nowhere. Now some more people tried to help the constable and they wanted to help the constable to arrest the invisible man, but they got blows from Griffin because he was invisible and no one was able to see him, and they got blows come out from nowhere. In the end, Jeffers was knocked unconscious as he made a last attempt to hold on the unseen scientist. That means at the end, Jeffers, the constable, was knocked unconscious. That means he lost his consciousness with the last blow that Griffin gave to him. There were nervous, excited cries of "Hold him!" but this was easier said than done. Griffin had shaken himself free and no one knew where to lay hands on him. That means that now the crowd, people present at the bar were excited and nervous also, and they only cried, "Hold him!" but he was not visible, so how can anyone hold him? But this was easier said than done. That it was easier to say, but it was very difficult to do because Griffin was now invisible. Griffin had shaken himself free and now no one knew where he lay hands on him. That means that now no one knew where Griffin was and he was now free. So this is the end of the chapter. This chapter is written by H.G. Wells. If you like the video,